Hello, my name is Daniela Zaroli, and today I will be discussing on why the illegalization of marijuana was both built off of racist ideologies and as well as a profitization of the corporate America of prison institutions, privately owned. To start off, there is a large stigma on marijuana being an abusive substance that can lead on to harder drugs, and that it is also very negative, impacting towards your body. This is scientifically unproven since the 40s and prior to that for millennia. It is true that if you are under the age of 25 and your brain has finished developing, not finished developing, that using marijuana could lead to memory gaps and poor cognitive function. But typically, people who experience smoking marijuana do not end up smoking it forever. They smoke it a little bit, they grow over it, and maybe they keep using it for medicinal purposes. But because of the laws that have been implemented since the 30s, it has been criminalized and used against minorities, especially people of color. Humans have been using the marijuana crop for centuries. They have been using it for pleasure purposes. They have been using it in steam baths, and they have been using it, like I've mentioned before, medicinal purposes. So if it was so good beforehand, what could have possibly have changed? Well, in the 30s, the commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, Henry Anslinger, who was also a starch prohibitionist, used racism to fuel a propaganda campaign against marijuana. He was using it specifically against Mexicans and other minorities who had lands that would grow the crop extremely richly, which ironically is also American soil. Henry Anslinger testified before Congress. Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. This is written in Martin Booth's Cannabis, A History, Chapter 13. Now, they spread these rumors like wildfire because America was very racist in the 30s and a little bit prior to that, almost always. They banned marijuana in 1937 with a mandatory minimum sentencing law. The first offense, being caught with possession of weed or any type of marijuana strain, could land 2 to 10 years in prison. The government knew he was inaccurate in his statements, and scientists have proved it time and time again that marijuana was safe to use and consume in the 40s. In 1973, bipartisan commission asked Nixon to decriminalize the drug, but Nixon, being in his track record, declared a war on drugs against Mexicans and people of color. So if everybody knew why it was so safe, why would they be incredibly tough on the drug? Nixon's aide, John Ehrlichman, came forward in 1994 and stated, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. It is a direct quote from John Ehrlichman. Nixon started the war on drugs to bully political enemies and to criminalize minorities in order to rid them off the streets. These days, despite laws being loosened in a few states, mandatory minimums are still in effect across the country, and weed accounts for nearly half of all drug arrests. And even though white people and colored people would smoke at the same rate, people of color are 4 times as likely to be arrested for weed possession. And once you are thrown into the prison system in an American country prison system, it can derail you from your life forever. The US prison population is 10 times higher than 50 years ago. It boomed during the 80s, during the war on drugs. The Sentencing Project rated how the prison systems were not completing their rehabilitation process. And in fact, that prison population has increased so much more in the past half century. According to the NYU School of Law, since 2000, the effect on crime rate of increasing incarceration has been essentially zero. So absolutely no effect on the crime rate imprisoning more people into the system. So why are we locking so many people up? Over 1/5 of the federal prisons in America are privately owned, and they profit off of how many prisoners they have incarcerated. This corporation is called the Correction Corporation of America. It's all one corporation. Due to the war on drugs, state and federal prisons were piling up on prisoners really, really quickly, and they couldn't keep up with it. The CCA began a type of deal that they would exchange money or they would make profit off of how many people that they imprison if they built their own prisons or sold their own prisons or bought their own prisons. In 2016, the CCA took in $1.7 billion from the amount of people that they had incarcerated. Private prisons are also an equal amount of taxing to citizens, just as high as non-private prisons. So they are taxed to taxpayers exactly the same. So there is no reason there needs to be a difference in one being owned and one being not. Private prisons sneak occupancy clauses into their contracts with their state. It requires state prisons always be full. They can never be low, or else they have to pay a fine to their state. So because of this, these private prisons tend to give out 2 times as many infractions, keeping them to lengthen their sentences and gain more profit and prevent paying under quota fines. Because the private prisons have a occupancy quota that they need to reach, and it is not above under 90. It is way, way up there. In 2021, we have begun the shift out of the profitization of incarcerated citizens for something as simple as weed possession, a harmless drug that can ruin the lives of anyone who is found holding it. So in 2021, President Biden signed an executive order to eliminate private prison control in attempts to remove implementing discriminatory housing policies to begin that step forward into decriminalizing and moving away from profiting off of keeping people caged like animals, no matter what their sentencing is. Another step forward to lead into going back into the original thought process of weed not being bad and actually being used for pleasure, fun, medicinal. It's actually better to. We've already gotten a lot more people using it more for pleasure or for calm, for like having a calm behavior and not like erratic. Sometimes weed does help with ADHD, not always, it depends. But weed also has a few medicinal properties that are very helpful. They are known to decrease people with anxiety disorders, or decrease anxiety with people with anxiety disorders. And also, they have been used by people who frequent seizures often. I know several people who have to buy drugs from people off the street because it's not legal here, so they would stop having seizures constantly because they were not wealthy or economically financially stable enough to go to the hospital and get treatments, or they were not financially stable enough to even get taken to the hospital. So if, for example, I don't care for smoking marijuana, it is not something I seek out, but I don't really care who else uses it because I know it has medicinal properties inside of it, and it's helped more people that I know than has hurt. Of course, you should also follow basic laws like how alcohol and tobacco are used, so no driving under the influence. So you will definitely get arrested for that and a suspended license. The best way to take these steps forward and to erase all this gross, racist, arbitrary laws is we need to stop and question why things are weirdly illegal for something that is so accepted by humankind for many a millennia. To reach towards a better functioning society and achieve steps towards racial equity. Thank you.